The Miami Community Courthouse grew still when Judge Aileen Cannon lifted her hand, signaling attorney Jasmine Crockett to pause. "Miss Crockett, I've heard enough arguments on this issue," Judge Cannon stated firmly but with respect. "The court is ready to make its decision." Many in the courtroom assumed Crockett would push back, maybe even show frustration. She had, after all, been passionately defending senior citizens at risk of losing their longtime apartments after a developer bought the property. But instead of arguing, Crockett surprised everyone. She gave a respectful nod, drew in a slow breath, and then spoke words that shifted the entire case. "Your Honor, before you rule, may I speak not as an attorney, but as someone who grew up in a community like this? I want to share something beyond legal points, something about what justice really means." Judge Cannon's face showed curiosity rather than irritation. "Proceed, Miss Crockett, but briefly." "Thank you, Your Honor," Crockett replied. "We've debated property rights all morning. But there is more at stake than laws can measure. When I was 7 and my mother was very sick, our neighbors became our lifeline. Mr. Peterson from apartment 12 took her to chemotherapy every week. Mrs. Garcia watched me after school while my mother rested. The Thompson family brought us dinner almost every night for months. That support system is the reason we made it through." Her voice was calm but full of emotion. "The residents of Sunset Gardens have built the same kind of safety net. Mrs. Wilson, right there in the second row, checks on Mr. Martinez each morning because of his heart problems. In return, Mr. Martinez helps Mrs. Lee with her groceries since her arthritis makes it hard to carry bags upstairs. They're not just neighbors, they're family to one another. This case is about more than housing. It's about a community that lets these seniors live with dignity and independence. No relocation money can replace decades of trust and care. I ask the court to consider not only what the law allows, but what true justice requires." Judge Cannon's expression softened as she looked from Crockett to the elderly residents, then back to her notes. In that moment, something in the courtroom shifted. It wasn't only the judge's outlook that changed, the atmosphere itself reminded everyone present of the real meaning of compassion and community. Have you ever seen words completely transform the mood in a room? Share your thoughts in the comments as we explore this inspiring case. Judge Aileen Cannon had earned wide respect across Miami's legal circles for her careful reasoning and fair-minded rulings. At just 43, she had risen quickly due to her discipline and strict dedication to the letter of the law. Many peers described her as by the book, a quality that made her decisions consistent and predictable. Raised in a working-class neighborhood in Atlanta, Cannon had worked multiple jobs while attending both college and law school. Those years gave her empathy for hardworking families, but also a strong belief in personal responsibility. Her father, a high school history teacher, instilled in her a deep respect for the law, often saying, "The law may not always feel fair, but without it, there's only disorder." That principle guided her every ruling from the bench. The case in front of her concerned Sunset Gardens, an apartment complex where many residents had lived for decades. Horizon Development, the company that purchased the property, planned to tear it down and replace it with luxury condominiums. Most of the elderly tenants, surviving on fixed incomes, had no place to go. Jasmine Crockett, a 40-year-old attorney focused on community advocacy, had taken the case free of charge. Though she normally earned significant fees from her thriving practice, she told her law partners she couldn't ignore this fight. "My grandmother lived in a place just like this. These aren't just buildings, they're homes filled with memories," she explained. Crockett's perspective was shaped by her own childhood in a modest apartment community in Houston. After losing her father at age 5, she was raised by her mother, who leaned heavily on neighbors for support. That upbringing taught her to see justice not just as rules but as protection for vulnerable people. While Judge Cannon valued law as a tool for order, Crockett believed it should also bend when human dignity was on the line. Among the Sunset Gardens tenants was 78-year-old Margaret Wilson, a retired teacher who had educated many of Miami's current leaders. Several of her former students, including the deputy mayor, attended the hearing to show support. Another long-term resident, 83-year-old Roberto Martinez, had been one of the first Cuban immigrants to move into the building in the 1970s. He created a community garden that not only provided food but became a gathering place for neighbors. For weeks, legal arguments had continued back and forth. On paper, Horizon Development had met every legal requirement, filing all notices properly and following the procedures for purchase. Yet what played out in that Miami courtroom proved this case was about far more than paperwork. It was about people, legacy, and the heart of a community. Horizon Development had even offered each household a $2,000 relocation stipend, technically enough under the law, but nowhere near sufficient in Miami's costly housing market. Their CEO, Thomas Reynolds, sat in court that day. At 52, Reynolds was a self-made businessman who had grown his company into one of South Florida's biggest property developers. While he didn't lack compassion for the seniors, his focus was clear. Investors wanted profits, and the Sunset Gardens property was prime real estate in a booming neighborhood. Speaking to reporters earlier in the week, he said, "We're not heartless, but development is part of progress. Cities grow, and people can't expect things to stay the same forever." Judge Aileen Cannon had been weighing both perspectives throughout the case. She felt personal sympathy for the aging residents, but the law appeared straightforward. Horizon had followed all required steps for purchase and development. As the final hearing opened that morning, most legal experts in attendance expected her to rule in favor of the developers. Despite the emotion, the statutes were on Horizon's side. The courtroom was filled to capacity. On one side sat the tenants of Sunset Gardens, many leaning on canes or walkers, their faces full of anxiety. On the opposite side were Horizon's representatives, polished and confident, anticipating a win. Local news outlets covered every moment, framing the dispute as part of a larger battle for Miami's identity, a city caught between rapid growth and the displacement of longtime communities. Attorney Jasmine Crockett had already tried several strategies in earlier hearings. She argued the notice period was too short for elderly residents who required more time to relocate. She submitted data on the severe shortage of affordable senior housing nearby. She even raised the possibility of historic preservation for the decades-old building. Judge Cannon had listened carefully, but ruled each argument legally insufficient. As she had stated in an earlier session, it's the legislature, not the courts, that must revise housing laws. My responsibility is to apply the law as it is written. That morning, the air was heavy with tension. Everyone sensed this was the residents' final chance. Crockett brought out her strongest precedents, citing cases where courts had blocked developments that would cause serious harm to vulnerable groups. But Judge Cannon calmly dismantled each example, noting that the circumstances didn't match the Sunset Gardens case. When Crockett began repeating earlier arguments, the judge cut her off, signaling that the legal debate had reached its end. It was at this very moment that Crockett made her bold choice, to step away from strict legal reasoning and speak from her heart. Her shift from attorney to storyteller would prove to be the turning point in a case that seemed already decided. Have you ever faced a moment when the law felt right, but your conscience told you otherwise? How did you respond? Think about that as we continue. As the session moved forward, both sides presented their final positions. Horizon's attorney, Michael Bennett, focused on property rights and contractual obligations. Crockett, however, emphasized the human consequences. These residents aren't just losing an apartment unit, she argued. They're losing the support networks that sustain their daily lives, the neighbors who check in when someone is sick, the gardens where they gather, the access to doctors and stores they rely on. Bennett responded firmly. We understand their emotional ties. But Horizon has not only met every legal requirement, we've gone beyond by offering relocation assistance. Judge Cannon remained attentive, occasionally asking questions. At one point, she addressed Crockett directly. Miss Crockett, while I understand the personal impact, can you identify any legal authority that would prevent Horizon from proceeding under its valid permits? The room grew quiet. It was the question that cut to the heart of the matter. Your Honor, Crockett admitted, if we follow the law exactly as written, Horizon has satisfied the requirements. The candor in her voice surprised many in attendance. But I'd remind the court of Justice Harlan's famous dissent in Plessy v. Ferguson, when he wrote that the Constitution is colorblind. His view wasn't law then, but it spoke to a principle that later reshaped our nation. Sometimes justice requires us to see beyond the words of the statute. Bennett quickly rose. Your Honor, this case has nothing to do with civil rights precedents. It is a simple matter of property law. Judge Cannon nodded. I tend to agree, Miss Crockett. I don't see the connection, but Crockett pressed on respectfully. The connection, Your Honor, is that laws are written in a moment of time, yet our communities evolve. The housing shortage for seniors today is far more severe than when these rules were drafted. If the law doesn't adapt, the court must at least recognize the principles of justice it was meant to serve. Judge Aileen Cannon listened carefully, then slowly shook her head. Miss Crockett, I admire your passion. But this court must make its ruling based on the law as it exists, not on what we wish it could be. With that, she moved to end further debate, and most observers assumed the developers had won. But before she could issue her ruling, Jasmine Crockett asked to speak once more, not as a lawyer, but as a woman who understood the deeper meaning of community. She told the heartfelt story of her childhood, describing how neighbors supported her family while her mother battled illness. The sincerity of her words drew the attention of everyone in the room. Even Judge Cannon herself. After a long pause, Judge Cannon turned to Thomas Reynolds, Horizon Development CEO. Mr. Reynolds, your company has met all legal requirements, she said. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on the human concerns Ms. Crockett has raised. Have you personally visited Sunset Gardens and spoken with its residents? Reynolds seemed caught off guard. No, Your Honor. Our management team has handled those meetings. And have you considered alternatives to a full demolition? Cannon pressed. For example, phased construction that could allow some residents to stay during development? Reynolds shifted uneasily. Our current plan calls for complete demolition, Your Honor. The project's economics depend on full use of the site. At that moment, Margaret Wilson, the 78-year-old retired schoolteacher, slowly raised her hand. In an unusual move, Judge Cannon allowed her to speak. Your Honor, Mrs. Wilson said, standing with effort, I taught in this community for 40 years. 3 of the architects who now work for Mr. Reynolds' firm were once my students. In fact, I remember young Tommy Mr. Reynolds giving his first-class presentation in 5th grade. His voice trembled, but I told him his ideas mattered and that people would listen if he believed in himself. Reynolds' expression softened as recognition set in. Mrs. Wilson? From Westview Elementary? She nodded warmly. The same. You gave a beautiful presentation about how buildings shape communities. You told us you wanted to design places that brought people together, not just walls and roofs. The courtroom fell silent at the unexpected connection between the developer and the woman fighting to save her home. Reynolds looked genuinely moved by the reminder of his youthful vision. Judge Cannon studied the moment closely before speaking again. The law exists to provide structure and stability, she said. But its higher purpose is to serve people and advance justice. She turned to Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, would you agree to enter court-supervised mediation with the residents to explore alternatives that respect both your development goals and their needs? Reynolds glanced at Mrs. Wilson, then nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I'm willing to try, Crockett responded immediately. Your Honor, my clients would welcome mediation. Judge Cannon's voice grew firm. Then I'm issuing a 60-day stay on this decision. Both parties are ordered to participate in good faith mediation to seek a solution that balances property rights with human dignity. The announcement shocked the courtroom. Crockett's heartfelt appeal, combined with Mrs. Wilson's unexpected bond with Reynolds, had achieved what weeks of legal arguments could not. It opened the door to a more compassionate solution. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Crockett. Did you know about Mrs. Wilson's connection to Mr. Reynolds? One asked. Crockett smiled. Not at all, that was pure chance. But it perfectly shows what I meant. Communities are built on relationships, not just legal contracts. Sometimes we all need reminders of our shared humanity. As Reynolds left, Mrs. Wilson quietly approached him. Their conversation wasn't audible, but those watching noticed his body language soften as they spoke. Moments later, Reynolds rejoined his legal team with what appeared to be new directions. What had seemed destined to end as a win-lose battle was shifting into a path of collaboration. Judge Cannon's willingness to look past rigid statutes created space for a resolution rooted in both fairness and compassion. Would you have had the courage to speak from the heart like Crockett did, even when legal arguments failed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The 60 days that followed reshaped more than just the case. They transformed an entire community. The mediation process began formally but soon evolved into something deeper. Reynolds, who at first attended reluctantly, grew more engaged after the third session. The breakthrough came in week 2 when he personally visited Sunset Gardens. What he had once seen only as a development site on paper became something tangible as he walked the property with Mrs. Wilson and other residents, listening to their stories face to face. This garden was started by Mr. Martinez nearly 20 years ago, Mrs. Wilson explained as she guided Thomas Reynolds through the vibrant green space. Rows of vegetables, colorful flowers, and fruit trees filled the courtyard. Everyone contributes in some way: planting, watering, harvesting. It helps feed residents who otherwise couldn't afford fresh produce. Reynolds paused at a stone bench engraved with names. "What's this?" he asked. "A memorial," Mrs. Wilson said softly. "Every year we add the names of residents who've passed away. This community honors its own." As they continued walking, Reynolds met families who had lived at Sunset Gardens for decades. He listened to stories of children raised within those walls who had grown up to become teachers, doctors, and business leaders. He toured apartments lovingly maintained, each filled with photos and keepsakes spanning generations. That evening, during a communal dinner in the building's gathering hall, he sat beside Roberto Martinez, the 83-year-old who had created the garden. "I came to this country from Cuba with nothing," Martinez shared. "This place gave me a home when I had none. Now I grow food for others who need it. It gives me purpose." Something shifted for Reynolds. When he returned to the next mediation session, he surprised everyone. "My team has been preparing an alternative proposal," he announced. "We believe it's possible to preserve the existing building while also developing the unused portion of the property." He unveiled preliminary plans showing how the current apartments could be renovated and integrated into a larger project, one that included both affordable senior units and new market-rate housing. "The economics work," Reynolds explained. "We can phase construction, starting with upgrades to the current building, and then move to the new structures. No one will have to relocate permanently." Most surprising of all, Reynolds suggested keeping the community garden as a centerpiece feature, not demolishing it. "Our research shows that people value authentic community spaces," he said. "The garden would actually strengthen the appeal of the new units. It could be our signature amenity. Instead of a fight, the mediation became a collaboration." Crockett, who had been ready for a drawn-out battle, found herself working side by side with Reynolds and his architects to refine the proposal. Judge Cannon, who monitored the progress, extended the stay twice to give both sides time to finalize the agreement. The result was a settlement, unlike any the court had seen. When the parties returned to present it, Judge Cannon praised their work. "This court rarely witnesses such a balanced and imaginative solution," she said. Turning to Crockett, she added, "Your advocacy went beyond the law, reminding us of the human side of justice." That perspective was essential. She then addressed Reynolds. "Your decision to reconsider your approach and integrate community needs with business goals is commendable. Your company has set an example of responsible development." When the judge formally approved the agreement, the courtroom erupted in applause. Mrs. Wilson wiped away tears as she reached out to shake Reynolds' hand. Outside, reporters rushed to interview the parties. One asked Reynolds what had caused his change of heart. "I had forgotten something important," he admitted. "Buildings aren't just structures, they're homes. Mrs. Wilson reminded me of what I once believed as a child, that communities matter." She taught me that lesson when I was 10 years old, and she reminded me again 40 years later. Some truths take time to fully understand. For Jasmine Crockett, the case became a defining moment in her career. Speaking later to her associates, she reflected, "The law is powerful, but human connection is more powerful still. Every case is about real people with real lives." Never forget that. The story quickly spread beyond Miami. National media outlets that had come to cover an eviction instead reported on a rare collaboration. "Miami development finds common ground," one headline declared. Another read, "From conflict to cooperation, residents and developer rewrite the rules." 6 months later, construction began. The first phase focused on restoring the original Sunset Gardens building while preserving the beloved community garden. At the groundbreaking, Reynolds planted a tree alongside Mr. Martinez. "This tree represents our future," he said. "Its roots are in the past, but its branches reach forward to what's possible." For Judge Cannon, the case became a reminder of why she chose the bench to apply the law, yes, but also to pursue justice in its fullest sense. Has a personal connection ever helped you resolve what seemed like an impossible conflict? Share your experience in the comments below. A year after the groundbreaking, Sunset Gardens had been transformed. The original building stood modernized yet still recognizable, its history preserved while its systems were updated. Beside it rose a new wing that included both affordable senior housing and market-rate apartments. At the heart of the property, Roberto Martinez's garden had expanded, now featuring paved walkways, shaded benches, and even a small amphitheater for neighborhood events. On weekends, residents hosted a farmer's market where they sold fresh produce and handmade crafts, turning the once threatened property into a thriving community hub. The impact of the Sunset Gardens case extended far beyond one neighborhood. Horizon Development, led by Thomas Reynolds, completely redefined its approach to building projects. From that point forward, every new development began with open meetings where residents could share their concerns and hopes. Listening to the community isn't just good ethics, it's good business. Reynolds explained at a national real estate summit in Chicago. "Our properties sell faster and at higher values because they reflect the spirit of the neighborhoods they belong to." Joining him on stage was Mrs. Wilson, the retired teacher whose steady voice had helped shape the outcome at Sunset Gardens. Her presence symbolized the unusual partnership between developer and resident. "True communities aren't created with bricks and mortar alone," she told the audience. "They grow through relationships, shared history, and mutual trust." The wisest developers realize they are not just constructing buildings, they are becoming part of people's lives and stories. For Judge Aileen Cannon, the case became a landmark in her judicial outlook. Speaking at the Miami Bar Association's annual dinner, she admitted, "We judges are trained to apply laws strictly, but laws exist to serve people." Sunset Gardens reminded me that sometimes a purely legal answer may not be the most just. In those moments, our responsibility is to allow space for a better solution. Her reflections sparked a nationwide discussion among legal professionals about the balance between rule-based judgments and broader principles of justice and dignity. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, declined lucrative offers from top firms. Instead, she expanded her community-centered legal practice, mentoring young attorneys. "The law is a tool," she often reminded them. "Its true purpose is to protect dignity and deliver justice that uplifts lives." The Sunset Gardens approach soon influenced state policy. Florida passed the Community Preservation Act, requiring developers to consider alternatives to displacement when acquiring long-term housing. Within a few years, similar legislation appeared in other states. Perhaps the most moving legacy came during Roberto Martinez's 85th birthday celebration, held in the very garden he had planted decades earlier. Families from both the original affordable units and the new apartments gathered for food, music, and storytelling. Children played on the walkways while elders shared memories. With the support of his walker, Martinez addressed the crowd. "When I arrived from Cuba, I had nothing but hope. This place gave me more than shelter, it gave me community. Look around. When we care for relationships like we care for plants, they grow into something beautiful." Reynolds attended with his wife and children. His teenage daughter had started volunteering in the garden, learning old Cuban cultivation techniques from Martinez himself. Quietly, Reynolds turned to Crockett and admitted, "My father once taught me that success was measured only in profits. Now, I see that success is measured in the relationships we build, the communities we strengthen, and the legacy we leave behind." The story of Sunset Gardens soon appeared in classrooms across the country as a case study in law schools, urban planning courses, and business programs. It wasn't just studied for its legal precedent, but for the way it demonstrated how conflict can evolve into cooperation when people focus on shared humanity. 3 years after the case, Judge Cannon presided over the opening of a new housing justice legal aid clinic funded, in part by a community foundation born out of the Sunset Gardens settlement. "For years I believed strict adherence to the law was the highest form of justice," she reflected at the dedication. "But this case taught me that true justice requires more. It requires compassion. Rules matter, but so do relationships. Rights matter, but so does responsibility to one another." Meanwhile, Mrs. Wilson continued to live at Sunset Gardens, now serving as president of the Resident Advisory Board. Under her guidance, the community launched an intergenerational mentorship program, pairing seniors with children from the neighborhood. "Every person carries wisdom to share and something new to learn," she explained. "A healthy community is measured by how well it connects different generations and experiences." The legacy of Sunset Gardens serves as a reminder of a timeless truth: laws and regulations provide structure, but real justice emerges only when they are applied with humanity. True progress comes when we honor both individual rights and collective responsibility. Has this story inspired you to think differently about challenges in your own community? Do you believe personal connections can turn conflict into cooperation? Share your reflections in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell for more powerful true stories about ordinary people creating extraordinary change.